It may seem like in the modern world, Africa has changed dramatically, and that markets and everything seem to be the commonplace. Cities and towns have given us this ability to trade with one another. But this ability is not new. Markets go back thousands of years in Africa. The easiest ones to trace are the ones that occurred around 900 AD to today. These marketplaces are in five sections, if we're talking about the purely internal ones. First, we have open air markets. This type of market is easy to have and relies on the agreement of a few civilizations. So it could be a town or a village that agrees either with itself or with its neighbors to trade. And they tend to have a common currency, which in Africa is cowrie shells. Because of the heat in Africa, even when there were buildings built that could withstand all kinds of heat and stuff like that, the people still preferred to sell outdoors. One, because the light there is so much better, and then two, the chances of your things getting spoiled are very low, as rain is not very common, and when it does occur, it's predictable. One thing you'll see a lot of in African markets is females. This is due to the fact that in Africa, women have been allowed to travel freely in any place, and no law has ever been seen in Africa that forbids women from traveling one place to another. In fact, there are historians such as Herodotus who allege that it is typical in Africa for the females to be out in the markets and the men to stay at home. Now, some people have suggested that this is a misinterpretation, both from Herodotus and a lot of other historians who've said this, including Ibn Battuta and so forth, because they saw a large number of females. They just assumed that it was the job of the female because the countries they come from forbade women. Now, let's leave the Americas out of it for a second. If we actually look at the old world, these markets are very progressive to the world. For example, if we take the Middle East, right? During Islam, they were forbidding women to travel freely. Now, of course, there were markets still set up by females, as even the Quran tells us there was a very rich woman who had many shops. And Europe had the same problem. Its Christian beliefs made it so that they didn't believe that women should be engaging as extensively or as deeply as men do in the markets and should focus more on the family. Even as far as Japan, there is a law that restricted the movement of Japanese women. As we read, the diaries of these two women clearly show that movement throughout Edo was an inescapable aspect of their daily lives. They were certainly not confined to the precinct of their homes, but leaving the city itself was admittingly more challenging due to the government imposition of the movement of women across Japan. Since the early Edo period, wives of the daimyo lords were forced to remain in the city as hostages while their husbands returned to their provinces to discourage them from any thoughts of plotting rebellions or conspiracies. This led to strict controls of women entering and leaving Edo, but as Lauri Nenzi argues in her work excursions, identity, travel intersections of place, gender, and status in Edo, Japan. This did not always discourage them from seeking ways to evade such controls. While Nenzi's work is devoted to depicting human travel across Japan and is not strictly focused on Edo itself, it does provide very interesting outlook on how the most famous places of Edo were portrayed and perceived by its inhabitants, and is recommended reading for anyone who is interested in the topic of Japanese travel diaries. So there were at least two travel diaries in Japan. And I remember, if you've ever watched that documentary about Japan, where they talk about how some woman had to be, firstly, you need to be accompanied by someone. So she had to be accompanied, but then she was sent back because she was not described properly in the writing. I think the problem was she didn't say that she was a young woman with open sleeves. And so she had to go to an inn, and then they had to go to another inn, and then they had to be searched. You get strip searched and all of that in order to travel. The second type of market, of course, is an indoor market. These indoor markets existed, but they were not highly favored because, of course, light bulbs didn't exist at the time and all of that. So they had to be set up. One way that they were set up was that they weren't permanent. And so while the ones in Takrur and the ones in other places in the Empire of Ghana had permanent stone walls, a lot of them would be set up and you could remove the roof. So the roof was something that you could remove, and then they would sell, 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 and then at night you could put the roof back on again. This also happened when it came to mills, in which people would line up in front of these places where they used to store food, and then they would purchase the food. Now, you must understand that this makes a whole of a lot difference in terms of civilization, in terms of the way people are operating. This is different than growing food for your family. This is growing food so that you can sell, which might feed the entire community. These walls, these civilizations, these cities that have some of these tended to be the third one that I'm going to talk about, the third type of market. This type of market is called market towns. Takrur was a market town. Manyikeni in South Africa, Southern Africa, was a market town. Mogadishu was a market town. And there's so much more. Even parts of Bornu were market towns. See, market towns are towns in which they are set up strictly for selling, for trade. These towns existed all over. In fact, Manyekeni in southern Africa means the place where people give each other. Strategically located, it is open to several different markets. So you can see that people who came from as far away as Tanzania and Kenya could reach this area. Mozambique, obviously. People from South Africa, people from Mapungubwe, people from Great Zimbabwe, people from Namibia, and in some cases, people from Congo came to Manyegeni, and Manyegeni had these enclosing walls. Now, these walls are not livable in a sense. So, in other words, this place was not a place where people lived. Instead, it was an area where people who lived very close to this area would set up shop, and then they would stay for a couple days and trade. Now, here's the thing: the currency in this region was two things only: gold and items. In some cases, you could use copper or whatever if you negotiate down. But gold was so common in this area that really it's gold that was the main thing. Cowrie shells were not necessary. Salt was sold through here, ships, whatever you like, it was sold through these regions. And we know that the people who built this must have been continuous with the cultures because these stone circles are continuous too. We also know that there are some huts. In fact, we know that there must have been some cattle in this region because we find grass that was only meant to feed the cattle in Great Zimbabwe, but we find it in Manigeni. This grass that is found here proves that at least some people stayed in this area for an exceedingly long time. Another thing, of course, that they traded was animals. Let us not forget that. Here is a small description from a European of one of these trade towns found in Guinea. They barter or exchange one commodity for another, as not having the use of coin or money. Thus, for iron bars, bulges, little glass bubbles, and other things brought at the French factories, they purchase elephant teeth, dry or green bullock hides, calves, goats, and deerskin, beeswax, civet, ambergris, salt, gold dust, ostrich, and heron feathers, tobacco, gum, Arabic cloth, millet, cattle, and provisions. The market of Kamina, as has been said, is pretty considerable at some time for dry and green hides and country cloths, and all but the best green hides and slaves are to be had in Rafisco and Porta di Ali, and in greater plenty. At Lamir Sil and Gerup markets, there are country cloth, tobacco, slaves, horses, camels, and other forts of cattle. The market of Jamasil is kept every other fourth day, which they call Gambaya, and there is the Mir Garanda, or collector of the king of Bakal, who receives his customs and other duties. The people about Cape Verde trade most in cattle. They fetch from a great way up the inland, buying them there in the markets, and then fattening in their own pasture grounds, but most of the bullocks' hides come from the inland, where they kill oxen only for the hides, which they dry and carry them to the French factories at Senega, Gori, and Camina, and to the English at Gambia. Speaking of Senegambian markets and females therein, this is the difference between how Black Africans treated their women and how Portuguese treated their women, especially when it came to marketplaces. So here it is. Who do the duty of the place and maintain order. Nevertheless, it is dangerous to go out at night, and the players on the guitar are often the victims their nocturnal perambulations. Nearly all the Portuguese in Africa are of mixed blood, that is, mulattoes, but they are so black that it requires a good knowledge of colors to distinguish them from the Negroes. These people take credit to themselves for being jealous and carrying that possession to excess. They keep their women extremely close, and the white ones in particular are never allowed to go out in the daytime, not even to mass. The women of color have rather more liberty. They go out in the daytime, but they are wrapped up in such a manner that nothing can be seen but their toes and one of their eyes. At visit, the women are never seen nor even spoken of, for to inquire after a lady's health is the greatest injury that can be done to the Portuguese in Africa. The daughters of the Papals, and indeed all the girls who are slaves, are more lucky. They are not watched so closely, but are allowed to work in the house and go out to market, or wherever their business calls them. They go almost naked, having only before them a little apron about a foot long and 6 or 7 inches wide, with belts of different colors, beads or rings, and fringe round their loins. When they are married, they wear a piece of cotton cloth which covers them from the waist to the calf of the leg. The third form of markets is something called floating markets. These markets were boats filled with things to be sold and traded. Now, obviously, these tended to be in rivers located all over the place, even though there were some that were on the sea. Now, to be certain so that you don't get it mixed up, I'm not talking about people who trade fish. These people were arbitrarily, or importantly, wasn't arbitrary. They were putting other goods that don't belong on the water on boats to go and trade. This was done by the Nzinku in Congo, also done by people in Mali. It was also done by people in the Maldives. So people who lived on islands did it as well, because how else are you going to trade with people? Now, I want to specify this is not international trade. This is local trade, because most civilizations happened to grow around rivers. Around the world, we find floating markets. These are sort of forgotten because of the buildings like malls and stuff that have existed that have taken people away. So people would rather drive. And of course, transportation. This is a big deal, by the way. Transportation changed everything, because now you could drive 5 minutes to a shop, which you would normally walk 30 minutes for, even though you live right next to a river where every morning hundreds of boats would just pull up with things to sell. And if you don't buy, they just drive on past. So imagine living in the Nile, right? So you start in the Nile and you're selling things through the Nile. People stopping you like one of those ice cream trucks. They're stopping you, you stop, you sell something. All you do is just paddle through, and people can't wait till you come because they won't see you again until tomorrow. Now, I want to make sure to separate. These are different than those boats for trading ivory. They're different than war boats. These are purely for trading goods, proper goods. While it still goes on today, the tradition in Congo of selling over rivers goes back a long time ago. So, from the history of Congo, we read River from the Kingdom of Congo. In the river Zaire are many islands, as has been said, scattered from the lake downwards, some of which are under the rule of the Anzinkus, who trade by means of this river with the people of Congo. Number four is caravans. These caravans were first seen in the Negro lands, were first seen by Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta describes the difference between some of the people that he saw outside of Africa and inside of Africa on how they treated females and what type of currency they used. Now, after I mention the fifth one, we shall get into currency and why exactly some of the currencies were very different than outside. So, in West Africa, in the land where Ibn Battuta called the country of the blacks, he talks about the caravans that traveled with these black people. Now, these caravans might as well be traveling towns, because they too are selling on the way, and gonna get to a place, and when they get to the place, they unload their goods, take up new goods, and then leave. They are very useful, and in fact, they were populated by a lot of females. And you will see here what I'm talking about when I say females were very typical in markets in Africa, because he comments on this and he is very surprised. I traveled from there overland in the direction of Takada with a big caravan of people from Gadamas. Their guide and leader was Alhaj Wujin, which means wolf in the language of the blacks. I had a camel for riding, and she camel to carry provisions. When we had covered the first day, the camel came to a stop. Al Hajj Wujin took what she had been carrying and divided it among his companions, who distributed it among themselves. There was in the caravan a Maghrebi from the people of Tadala, who refused to carry any of it as others had done. One day my slave boy was thirsty, and I asked this man for water, but he gave him none. We then came to the country of the Badama, who are a country of Berber tribe. Caravans travel only under their protection, and in this connection, women are more important than men. They are nomads and do not stay in one place. Their tents are strange in form. They set up wooden poles and put matting on them. On top of these, they put a network of poles, which they cover with the skins or strip of cotton. Their women are most perfectly beautiful of women and have the most elegant features. They are pure white and very fat. I have not seen in the country any who are so fat. They feed on cow's milk and pounded millet, which they drink mixed with water, uncooked night and morning. Anyone who wants to marry among them settles with them as near to their country as possible and does not go with them further than Cacao and Iwalatan. We shall return to that one. But the last one is long term trade. Now, this one does not need a big explanation. So, obviously, we're talking about people traveling on boats intercontinentally. So, people from Ghana traveling to Egypt, people from India traveling to, I don't know, the Maldives, people from anywhere traveling over the entire regions. And this is something that happened a lot. Now, because of the travel to the Maldives, Africans traveled in a giant way to the Maldives and had markets there. In fact, there's a thing that Ibn Battuta says, which one of the rulers of the Maldives, I don't know if it was just one, but one of the rulers of the Maldives happened to be an African. And so we know that the Maldives market and their markets played a huge role in the Maldives and the Afro Maldivian people living today. So that is the last one. And for this, we have Takada, described by Ibn Battuta, an excellent man. I also received hospitality from Jafar Muhammad Al Masaufi. The houses of Takada are built of red stone. Its water runs through copper mines, spoiling its color and weight and taste. There is no cultivation there except for the little wheat, which is eaten by the merchants and foreigners, which sell at 20 of their muds for a mithqal of gold, their mud being a third of the mud of the country. Millet is sold among them at a gold mithqal for 90 muds. Now, here's the important part. There are many scorpions which kill young children who have not reached puberty, but only rarely kill men. One day, while I was there, a scorpion stung the son of the Sheikh Said bi Ali in the morning. He died at once, and I attended his funeral. The inhabitants of Takada have no occupation except trade. Every year they travel to Egypt and import some of all the fine fabrics and other such things there are in that country that are in that country. These people live in ease and luxury, vying with one another in the number of their male and female slaves. It is the same with the people of Mali and Iwalatan. They sell educated females only rarely and at a high price. When I came to Takada, I wanted to buy an educated slave woman, but could not find one. Later, the Qadi Abu Ibrahim sent me one belonging to one of his friends. I brought her for 25 mithqals. Then her former owner regretted it and wanted to revoke the sale. I said, "If you show me another like her, I will revoke the deal." He pointed out to me a slave woman belonging to Ali Algol, the Maghrebi of Tadala, who had refused to take any of my belongings when my she camel collapsed, and had refused a drink of water to my slave boy when he was thirsty. I brought her from him and she was better than the first slave. I revoked the deal with the first owner. Later, the Maghrebi regretted the sale of the slave and wanted to revoke it. He begged me to do so, but I refused it, if only to repay him for his bad behavior. Now, you must remember that that's the guy he explained in the earlier one. So you can see this is a sales town. And so that was not just describing nothing. And he re-meets this person who didn't want to help him earlier because he was a stingy person, probably due to his sales tactics. Now, this is something that is not common within the salesmen in these areas. And in fact, it's very, very different. Now, of course, when it comes to selling things, things that matter are currency. You can't just sell something to someone if they do not value what you have. If we read about Tagaza, you can see that the people of Mali had way higher expectations in the minds of the Europeans and the Middle Easterns for money than the people in other places who use cowrie shells and other forms of metals. As we read, there are no trees, only sand in which is a salt mine. They dig the ground, and thick slabs are found in it, lying on each other as if they had been cut and stacked under the ground. A camel carries two slabs. The only people living there are the slaves of the Masufa, who dig the salt and live on dates brought to them from Dara and Sigilamasa, camel meat and anli, which is imported from the country of the blacks. The blacks come from their country to Tagaza and take away the salt. A load of it is sold to at Iwalatan or Walata for 8 to 10 mithqals, and the city of Mali for 20 to 30, sometimes 40. The blacks trade with salt as others trade with gold and silver. They cut it in pieces and buy and sell with these, for all its squalor quinters of gold dust are traded there. When in the Maldives, Ibn Battuta realized that the cowrie shells that he had spotted in other places in Africa were present here too for selling. As we read, the people buy pottery when it is brought to them with chickens, so that a cooking pot is sold amongst them for 5 or 6 chickens. From these islands, they are exported by ship the fish we have mentioned, coconuts, waistcloths, willian, and cotton turbans, as well as brass utensils, of which they have a great many, cowrie shells and kanbar. This is the hairy integument of the coconut, which they tan in pits on the shore, and afterwards beat out with bars. The women then spin it, and it is made into cords for sewing ships together. These cords are exported to India, China, and Yemen, and are better than hemp. The Indian and Yemenite ships are sewn together with them, for that sea is full of reefs. And if a ship is nailed with iron nails, it breaks up on striking the rocks, whereas if it's sewn together with cords, it is given a certain resilience and both not fall to pieces. The inhabitants of these islands use cowrie shells as money. This is an animal which they gather in the sea and put into pits, there where its flesh disappears, leaving its white shell. They call 100 of these by the name of Sia, and 700 by the name of Fal, 12,000 Kuta, and 100,000 Busta. They buy and sell with these at the rate of 4 bustas for a gold dinar, but they often fall in value 10 bustas for a dinar. They sell them in exchange for rice to the people of Bengal, who also use them as money, as well as the Yemenites, who used them instead of sand as a ballast in their ships. These cowries are used also by the Negroes in their lands. I saw them being sold at Mali and Gagwa at the rate of 1,150 for a dinar. So, why should we talk about these markets? Well, it's just to open the conversation so people understand that these people were not living a tribal life in the way that most people like to explain, and that there actually was a way to rise in social status and rank without being the king or a governor of some kind. Now, obviously, I could read about cowrie shells in the Kingdom of Congo, but I think we've had enough reading for one day. So thank you very much. Like, share, subscribe, donate, do a backflip, whatever you got to do. Let's try and keep things going.